Everybody in Millhaven knew Cole Harmon, and most of them had an opinion about him. The opinions were not especially flattering. He was the kid who had spent 3 years in the back row of every class at Millhaven High, the one the teachers called on when they wanted to catch someone not paying attention, and were usually wrong about that. He was the kid who had shown up to his sophomore year with a busted lip and no explanation who fixed Mrs. Patterson's fence post one afternoon without being asked, and then spray-painted a fairly accurate portrait of the school principal on the water tower 6 weeks later. He was in the shorthand that small towns use for people they cannot quite categorize trouble. What Millhaven mostly agreed on was that Nora Harmon had her hands full. Nora had raised Cole since he was 4 years old after his parents died within a year of each other, his father in a plant accident, his mother from something the doctors called a complication, and that Nora never discussed in front of the boy. She was 72 years old, sharp as a finishing nail, and she had been answering for Cole Harmon at her front door for the better part of 15 years. She kept a slipper by the door specifically for these occasions. Not to throw, she was too practical for that, but to hold, which she found focused her thinking. On a Tuesday afternoon in late May, the neighbour from 3 houses down came up the gravel drive with the particular walk of a woman building towards something. Nora watched her coming from the kitchen window and picked up the slipper before the woman reached the porch steps. The complaint was that Cole had jammed her back door shut with a piece of scrap lumber wedged under the handle so it would not open from inside or out. She had been trapped in her kitchen for 40 minutes that morning, missed her bus to the county market, and lost a full day of selling. She wanted the boy disciplined. She wanted an apology. She was considering calling the county sheriff's office. And she wanted Nora to understand she was not the kind of woman who made empty threats. Nora listened without interrupting, which was a skill she had developed out of pure necessity. Then she called Cole's name toward the backyard. He came around the side of the house at a pace that suggested he had been close enough to hear everything and far enough away to claim otherwise. He was tall for his age, a little angular, with his grandmother's same flat expression when he was being evaluated. "Cole Harmon," Nora said, "what exactly did you think you were doing with that woman's door?" It was not quite a question. Cole looked at the neighbour for a moment, then back at Nora. "Her mother hasn't had a real meal since Sunday," he said. "The Social Security deposit came in Friday, and it was gone by Friday afternoon. I've been bringing the old woman food from our kitchen for 2 weeks because she's too proud to ask anyone, and her daughter's been telling the neighbours she just likes to stay indoors." He looked at the neighbour without particular heat. "I jammed the door because the deposit came in this morning, and I wanted to make sure it stayed where it was supposed to go for once." The neighbour's colour changed twice in about 4 seconds. She started to say something, then stopped, then started again. Nora set the slipper down on the porch railing. What followed was short and not especially loud, but by the end of it the neighbour was walking back down the gravel drive at a different pace than she had arrived, and Nora was standing on the porch with her arms crossed, watching her go. Cole leaned against the doorframe. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. Nora was quiet for a moment. "You've got about a month left of high school," she said. "After that, I want you to find some direction. And a girl with more sense than you have, because Lord knows you need the supervision. Where am I supposed to find one of those?" "Don't push it." But when she turned back toward the kitchen, she pressed the corner of her apron to the outside corner of her eye just once, in the way she did when something landed on her that she was not prepared for. He would find that girl, as it turned out. It would take him 15 years, and the road between here and there would cost him more than either of them could have imagined standing on that porch. Elaine Vosse had been the reliable one for so long that it had stopped feeling like a choice. She was the friend who remembered the details, who showed up with the right thing at the right time, who kept her own problems tidy and off to the side where they would not inconvenience anyone. She had graduated high school with honors, chosen Ohio State for its French literature program, and was finishing her senior year with the kind of transcript that made academic advisors use words like exceptional and then pause to make sure she understood they did not say that often. She understood. She was also, at 22, almost entirely inexperienced with men, in the way that has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with not having had much reason yet to be careful. Derek Ashby introduced himself outside the language building on a Wednesday in February. He was an adjunct instructor, 26, with the kind of looks that photographed well and the kind of attention that felt at first like being genuinely seen. He complimented her thesis defense. He knew the right things to say about French literature and said them in a register that suggested earned opinion rather than performance. 3 weeks later, he was at her apartment for dinner. A month after that, he had a drawer. He never offered to split anything. She noticed this the way you notice a draft in a room, registered it, attributed it to something reasonable, and moved on. He ate what she cooked, watched what she chose, borrowed her car twice without asking the second time. She told herself this was intimacy. She was not wrong exactly, just wrong about what kind. 4 months in, on a Sunday evening in October, she told him she was pregnant. He was finishing the last of the pasta she had made, and he set his fork down with a particular kind of care, the kind that means the person is deciding something quickly. What came after that was not a conversation. He said things she had not prepared herself to hear, from someone sitting at her kitchen table in her chair, having just eaten her food. He questioned the pregnancy in terms that were specific and ugly. He raised his hand and then lowered it, which she would think about for a long time afterward, not because he had stopped himself, but because the calculation had been visible. He packed a bag that night. On his way out, he took her Bluetooth speaker off the kitchen counter and her good umbrella from the hook by the door. She stood in the hallway and watched him do it, and did not say anything, because she was still catching up to what was happening. The door closed. The language department asked him to leave within 2 weeks, which she had not requested and had not expected. He drove back to whatever town he had come from and took a position teaching middle school geography, and the version of events he carried with him apparently involved a department that had felt threatened by him. She heard this second-hand, and only once, and did not think about it again. She took her finals 4 months pregnant in December, in the large hall where the heat never worked properly, and she did fine. She graduated in the spring with an honours distinction, and nobody in the audience who was there specifically for her. Virginia Holt, who co-ran Voss and Holt Independent Press out of a converted storefront on North High Street, had interviewed her twice and called with an offer the same week. Elaine started on a Monday. The following Friday, she collapsed at her desk before lunch, and her colleagues called an ambulance. Virginia Holt rode with her. Elaine would not remember much about the ride itself, only that Virginia held her hand and did not talk, which was the right thing. The surgery was straightforward. Afterward, in the recovery room, the attending physician told Elaine in the direct and slightly abstracted manner of someone at the end of a long shift that carrying a pregnancy to term was not something she should expect to be possible. Elaine asked after a moment what it had been. The doctor said a boy, and stepped out. Virginia stayed until almost midnight. Somewhere around 10 o'clock, in the quiet of a hospital room, after visiting hours, she told Elaine something she had apparently never told anyone. 40 years ago, I was in almost the same position you're in, she said, and I signed papers I couldn't take back. There isn't a week that goes by that I don't know exactly how old she would be. She looked at her hands for a moment. I hired you because no one did that for me when I needed it. I didn't want to be the reason it didn't happen for someone else. She said it without resolution, the way people say things they have carried too long to dress up anymore. 3 months later, Elaine was back in her condo. The spare bedroom had a closed door. The speaker Derek had taken had been replaced with a smaller one she rarely turned on. She sat at her desk on a Tuesday evening with papers in front of her, and the window going dark, and the apartment was quiet in the way that had stopped feeling temporary. She was 23 years old. She had a job she was good at, and a life that was by any reasonable measure intact. She did not yet know how long the quiet would last. It would be 15 years. 15 years is long enough to become someone. Elaine had become the kind of person Voss and Holt needed her to be: steady, exacting, good at the parts of the job that required patience, and good at the parts that required a willingness to disappoint people. Virginia had retired 3 years ago and left her name on the door and Elaine's name on the lease, and the press had not lost a step. It was not a large operation. 4 full-time staff, a roster of freelance editors, a catalogue that ran about 14 titles a year. In Columbus's literary community, it carried weight, and Elaine had learned from Virginia that weight was worth more than size if you were careful about where you put it. She was by any external measure fine. She had the job and the condo and a good coat and opinions about restaurants. Rosa Medina, who had been at the press for 9 years and was Elaine's closest friend by the natural attrition of shared work and shared coffee and shared exasperation, would have said Elaine was more than fine. Rosa would also have said, and had said more than once, that Elaine had a talent for finding reasonable men and then locating the one quality that made them impossible. There had been 5 of them in the past 5 years. One had chewed loudly. One had said the word utilize too often. One had been perfectly acceptable in every detectable way, and Elaine had ended it after 6 weeks with a composure that Rosa found frankly unsettling. Rosa had her own problems in this department, but at least her problems were legible. On a Thursday afternoon in November, they were at the coffee shop 2 doors down from the press, which was where they went when the office felt too small for a real conversation. The poetry contest had been running for 3 weeks, and the submissions had overtaken the front desk. The assistant had started sorting them into boxes, and the boxes had started multiplying. Most of the entries came in by email, but a portion still arrived by mail. And it was from that portion that Elaine had pulled something that morning and carried to the coffee shop in her bag. She set it on the table between their cups. A standard white envelope, the address written by hand in compressed, slightly tilted print. The return address was Pendleton Correctional Facility, Pendleton, Indiana. Rosa looked at it. Then she looked at Elaine. "Please tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing." "The poem doesn't qualify," Elaine said. "Too unpolished. But the letter that came with it is something else. I read it twice this morning." She turned the envelope over in her hands. "His name is Cole Harmon. A little over 30. He writes like someone who has stopped thinking about how he sounds. That's a very charitable way to describe a letter from a prison. I'm going to write back." Rosa put her cup down. "Elaine, I'll use the press P.O. box. He is a man in a correctional facility and we do not know what he is in for. That's why I'm going to ask him." Rosa looked at her for a long moment. "You have lost your mind," she said clearly, "and without drama, the way you state a thing you have accepted." Elaine laughed. It was a real laugh, not a deflecting one, and Rosa noticed this and filed it away without comment. They stayed another 20 minutes and talked about the contest and a manuscript that needed a difficult conversation with its author. Walking back to the office, Elaine mailed the letter from the box on the corner, a single page on press stationery, 2 short paragraphs. She had told him his poem was not right for the contest and asked him one question. That evening at home, sitting at her desk with the reading lamp on and the rest of the apartment dim, she became aware that she was curious about a person in a way she had not been in a long time. Not the manageable interest she had extended toward the 5 reasonable men, the kind that stayed within its own borders. Something less controlled than that. She did not do anything with the feeling. She just noticed it was there, and the quiet of the apartment was the same quiet it had always been, and also for reasons she could not have explained slightly different tonight. 2 months went by. Elaine checked the press P.O. box the way she checked most things she had decided not to think about occasionally without admitting she was looking for anything specific. By January, she had mostly stopped expecting a reply. The contest had closed, the winners had been notified, and the submission pile had been cleared from the front desk. The reply came on a Tuesday in the middle of February, postmarked Pendleton. 5 pages, front and back, written in the compressed print she recognized from the envelope. She read it at her desk with the door closed. He had been driving for a rideshare company out of Columbus for about 3 years when it happened. On a Friday evening in October, he picked up a fare near campus, and when he pulled up, the woman waiting outside was Larissa Calloway, who he had not seen since they were both 18, and leaving Millhaven in different directions. She was heading home for the weekend. They talked the whole drive the way you do with someone who knew you before you were whoever you became. Somewhere on the county road, north of the city, she asked if she could take the wheel for a stretch. He said it the way it was. He knew he should not have, and he did it anyway because she was Larissa, and it seemed harmless, and the road was empty. On the Millhaven River Bridge, a car drifted across the center line and came at them fast. Larissa pulled hard. The car went through the rail and into the river. Cole got her to the bank. She was gone before the paramedics arrived. His fingerprints had washed off the wheel in the recovery. The other driver was never identified. The jury had a dead passenger, a driver who admitted he had handed over the wheel and no one else to point to. 3 years criminally negligent homicide. He had sold his Columbus apartment to cover the restitution order and the civil judgment that Larissa's grandmother had filed against him. He had his grandmother Nora's house in Millhaven, and that was the whole inventory. The letter ended. "I hope that is enough to start with. Thank you for writing back." Elaine read it a second time. Then she opened her desk drawer, took out a sheet of plain paper, not press stationery, just paper, and wrote back by hand. She told him about Derek, in 2 paragraphs, without softening it. She told him about the miscarriage in 1. She told him about the 15 years and the condo and the particular quality of a life that was functional and correct, and missing something she had stopped being able to name. She sealed the envelope before she could reconsider, and mailed it from the corner box on her way home. He wrote back in a week. Not a letter, but a delivery. A large arrangement of red roses arrived at the press on a Thursday morning, addressed to her by name, no return address on the card. Rosa appeared in her office doorway, holding them with an expression that moved through several phases before settling on something unreadable. The card had 3 words on it. "I am not afraid." Rosa set the arrangement on the desk. She looked at the roses. She opened her mouth and then closed it, which for Rosa was unusual, and then she went back to her office and pulled the door shut at a careful, deliberate speed that communicated more than a slam would have. After that, the letters came regularly, his every 3 weeks or so, hers in return, both of them on paper, both postmarked from their respective addresses. She learned the shape of his days at Pendleton, and he learned the shape of hers at the press. They did not perform for each other. That was the quality she kept returning to, the absence of performance on both sides, the way the letters felt like 2 people talking in a room with the lights on. 6 months passed in this way. In the last letter, almost incidental to everything else, he mentioned that his release date had been set. Early June. He said he was planning to get back on his feet as fast as he could. He did not ask her anything about it. Elaine called the facility the following morning, confirmed the date, and wrote it on a notepad she kept on the edge of her monitor. She did not write to Cole about any of this. She had made a decision she had not fully put into words yet, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was in no hurry to explain it to anyone, including herself. The facility was about 90 minutes northeast of Columbus, and Elaine had been parked across from the entrance for 20 minutes before the hour she had written on that notepad. It was a clear morning in early June, warm enough that she had left her jacket on the back seat, and she had done several things with her hands already checked. Her phone, adjusted the mirror, found a hair tie she did not need. Her palms were damp. The gates opened at 5 past the hour. Cole walked out, carrying a backpack over one shoulder, stopped a few feet past the entrance, and looked up at the sky for long enough that it was clearly intentional. Then he spotted a puddle at the edge of the lot from the previous night's rain, took 3 running steps, and jumped into it with both feet. The water went in every direction. He threw one arm out and shouted something short and sharp, and a cluster of pigeons near the curb lifted off and circled once over the building before settling somewhere out of sight. He looked across the road and saw her. They met in the middle. He was taller than she had imagined, which meant she had been imagining. He had a few days of stubble and wet shoes and was looking at her with the expression of a man who has spent considerable time not letting himself believe something good is coming. "I made soup," she said. Something in his face shifted. "That's the best thing anyone said to me in 3 years. He looked at her for another moment. "You didn't have to come out here." "I know," she said. "Let's go." At the condo, he was careful in the way people are when they are aware of taking up space that is not theirs. He took the spare room without being shown twice, closed the door without letting it click, folded his towel over the rack. When she offered to let him borrow her car for job searching, he shook his head. "A car's a personal thing," he said. "I'll figure it out." The job search started the next morning. He had a list rideshare companies, dispatch outfits, a couple of taxi operations still running in the city. He was gone most of the day. When he came back that evening, he sat down at the kitchen table and said they had all passed. His conviction showed on the background check, and his commercial driver's license reinstatement was still in review with the Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles. "Try the trades," Elaine said. "There's always work for someone who can fix things." "I'm better with engines than drywall," Cole said. "But I can do drywall. I can do most things if someone gives me 20 minutes with it." He was not asking for anything. He was reporting the way he did, and then he let it go. 2 days later, he left early and forgot his phone on the kitchen counter. Elaine was working at the table when it buzzed, a 765 area code Millhaven. She did not answer it. When Cole came home 2 hours later, she told him he had a missed call. He looked at the number and went still. He stepped out onto the small balcony and called back. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. He came inside and stood at the edge of the kitchen. "My grandmother's neighbor called," he said. "Nora died in her sleep last night." Elaine pulled out the chair nearest him. He did not take it. He slid down against the lower cabinets until he was sitting on the kitchen floor, and after a moment she sat down on the linoleum next to him. He was quiet for a little while. Then he said, "I wanted to find work first. I wanted to call her and tell her things were okay." He looked at the floor. "Her hair. I mean my hair. She remembered me with curls and it's not there yet. I thought if I just waited another couple weeks." He stopped. He cried without making much sound. Elaine stayed on the floor next to him and did not say anything meant to fix it because there was nothing, and the floor was the right place to be, and silence was the right thing to offer. In the morning they would drive to Millhaven. The bridge was on the way. Cole drove. Elaine had offered, but he wanted the wheel, and she let him have it without making it a conversation. They talked for most of the drive north, and she told him things she had not thought about in years, mostly to keep him from disappearing too far into himself. When the Millhaven River came into view ahead, Cole slowed without being asked, and pulled onto the gravel shoulder just before the bridge. He got out. Elaine stayed in the car and watched him walk to the railing and stand there with both hands on the top bar looking down at the water. He did not move for a few minutes. Then he came back, got behind the wheel and pulled onto the road without saying anything. She did not ask. By the time they reached Millhaven, the town already seemed to know Cole had arrived. A neighbor named Tilda Marsh met them in the driveway before they had the doors fully open, and within the first minute she referred to Elaine as his wife. "She's not my wife," Cole said. Tilda smiled and said she would put on coffee. The correction did not appear to register. Elaine made most of the funeral arrangements over the next few hours quietly from her phone. Cole moved through Nora's house with the particular focus of a man doing the only thing available to him. Neighbors arrived through the afternoon and left, carrying picture frames, a kitchen clock, a quilt. He kept 3 things for himself: a small silver-framed icon from Nora's dresser, her old percolator, and a set of silver-handled flatware she had owned since before Cole was born. The funeral was the following afternoon. Most of Millhaven came. Afterward, when the reception had thinned to the last few people, an older woman appeared at the edge of the yard and walked straight toward Cole. Elaine had seen her earlier but had not spoken to her. The woman came at Cole with open hands, striking him on the chest and shoulders. She was not large and the blows did not do damage, but she meant every one of them. She was crying and saying Larissa's name. Cole stood still and took it. Elaine moved toward them, and Cole shook his head at her without turning around. When the woman ran out of breath, she sat down on the porch step. Cole sat down next to her. "I'm sorry, Ruth," he said. "I should not have let her drive. I knew it and I did it anyway. I'll carry that." He looked at his hands for a moment. "If you ever need anything looked at around the house, roof gutters, anything, you call me and I'll come." Ruth Calloway looked at him for a long time with eyes that had been through more than the current grief. "There'll be one thing to ask," she said quietly, "but not yet." Then she got up and went home. Cole sold Nora's house to a neighboring farm operation the next morning. He did not explain why he did not want to keep it, and Elaine did not ask. They drove back to Columbus that afternoon. He had no hometown left to return to. What he was building now was in Columbus with what he had, and that was where they both understood things stood. Back in Columbus, the job search stayed cold. A warehouse position on the north side turned Cole down on a Tuesday, and he came home and said almost nothing about it. Just set his jacket on the chair by the door and asked if there was anything that needed doing around the apartment. That evening, Elaine said what she had been thinking about since the rideshare companies passed on him. "Register a business," she said. "Do the work yourself. Set your own terms. Don't hand anyone a background check before you've already shown them what you can do." Cole looked at her the way he looked at things he was deciding whether to take seriously. Then he laughed once. "I wouldn't even know where to start with something like that." "I do," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'll think about it," he said, which from Cole meant he was already most of the way to yes. That same evening, coming back through the lobby with a bag of hardware for a loose hinge on the spare room door, he held the entrance open for an older woman, managing 2 grocery bags in her hands and a third looped over her wrist. He took all 3 without asking, introduced himself, and carried them to the ground-floor apartment at the end of the hall. Her name was Helen Briggs, 79, retired schoolteacher, widowed for 20 years, and the building's unofficial institutional memory. She invited him in to set the bags on the counter, and while he was there, he noticed the curtain rod in the living room lying on the floor beside the window, with the curtains pooled under it. "How long has that been down?" he asked. 3 months, give or take, Helen said. "I've had 2 men look at it. The first one charged me $60 and it lasted 9 days. The second one charged me $80 and it came down before he reached the parking lot." Cole picked up the rod and looked at the bracket, then at the wall. "Do you have a drill? I have my husband's toolbox under the bathroom sink." It turned out to contain most of what he needed. He rehung the rod in 20 minutes using the correct anchor for the wall type, which neither of the previous repairmen had bothered with. When he was done, Helen fed him half a coffee cake from the counter and looked at him with the focused attention of someone filing information away. "You should open a business," she said. He was back the next morning with his own toolkit and a piece of notebook paper with a short list on it. He fixed the bathroom faucet, rehung 2 interior doors that were dragging on the carpet, and replaced the weather stripping on the front door, which Helen had been supplementing with folded newspaper since the previous fall. When he told her what he wanted to charge, she told him that was not acceptable. He said to consider it an opening offer. She said that was not how pricing worked. They settled on a number that was fair, and that Helen immediately told everyone she knew was an extraordinary bargain. Helen knew a great many people. She knew them in the building, and in the 3 buildings adjacent, and in the small park, 2 blocks over where a particular group of retirees gathered on dry mornings. Within a week, she had told all of them about the young man on the 4th floor. She described his work in the specific, credible terms of someone who had been burned twice by people who did not know what they were doing, which made her recommendation land differently than enthusiasm alone would have. Cole registered Your Helping Hand with Franklin County as a sole proprietorship. Elaine filed the paperwork one evening in about 40 minutes. Rosa designed a simple card with the name and a phone number. Helen distributed the cards in person, with a brief account of her curtain rod and a look that made clear she considered the matter settled. The calls started within days. Within 3 weeks, there was a backlog. Cole bought a used pickup truck, white, with 140,000 miles on it, and a tailgate that stuck using what remained from Nora's house sale. He kept a toolbox in the bed and a small notebook in the glove compartment where he tracked jobs and hours. He was tired when he came home in the evenings, but it was a different kind of tired, the kind that comes from having used yourself for something that held up. One night in late October, he was at the kitchen table finishing dinner, and Elaine was on the couch with a manuscript. And on the counter near the stove sat a covered dish. Helen had left by the door that afternoon more coffee cake, a note on top in her careful schoolteacher print that said, "For the both of you." The lamp was on. Outside it had gotten cold, and the windows were dark. Neither of them said anything for a long stretch, and the quiet in the apartment had stopped being empty sometime in the past few months without either of them having marked the exact moment it changed. Cole had been thinking about Elaine's birthday. It was coming up in December, and he wanted to do something she would actually remember. He did not know what that meant in practice. He was going to have to ask Rosa, which was going to cost him something, and he had already decided it was worth it. Cole called Rosa on a Wednesday morning in November and asked if she had time to meet for lunch. There was a pause on the line that contained several things, and then she said she could do Thursday. She arrived at the restaurant on North High Street before him, coat still on, coffee already in front of her. He had been to the barber shop that morning. He stopped at the hostess stand, bought 3 long-stemmed roses from the small bucket near the register, and put one in front of each woman at the table before he sat down. Rosa looked at the rose. Then she looked at him. Her arms were crossed. "Cole," she said. "What is this?" "I need your help," he said. "Elaine's birthday is in December, and I want to do something she'll actually remember. I don't know her well enough yet to know what that looks like. But I think you do." Rosa uncrossed her arms somewhere around the second cup of coffee. Not as a moment, she just stopped holding herself at that angle and reached for the creamer instead, and after that the conversation became more useful. They talked about Elaine the way people talk about someone they know well enough to be specific. The dog came up. Elaine had mentioned wanting one for years, Rosa said, and kept finding practical reasons it was not the right time. A pug, specifically, more than once. Do you know anyone who breeds them? Cole asked. Rosa thought for a moment. There's a man named Frank DeLuca. He runs a kennel about 20 miles outside Columbus. I know him slightly. Cole called Frank that afternoon from the truck. Frank was direct, knew his inventory, did not oversell anything. He had one female pug puppy left from a recent litter, fawn-coloured, 8 weeks old, available in 2 weeks. I'll take her, Cole said. The party was at Rosa's cabin on Buckeye Lake on the second Saturday in December. Rosa's friends made a small group, 4 people plus Helen, who Cole had collected from the lobby on the way out and installed in the passenger seat of the truck before she could raise objections about the drive. The cabin was a simple wood-frame place, set back from the water, warm inside the kind of space that did not need decoration to feel like something. Frank brought the puppy in a small crate and arrived at Cole's request after Elaine. He set the crate in the back room and stayed near it, and Cole noticed Rosa noticing this without intending to. When it was time, Cole brought the crate out and set it in front of Elaine. She heard the sound from inside before she got the latch open, a small, self-important snuffling. And by the time the puppy tumbled out, wearing a red ribbon, and immediately sat down to scratch her ear with one back foot, Elaine was already crying in the way that happens when something catches a person before their defenses are up. The puppy looked around the room with the mild authority of someone who expects to be accommodated and has no reason to doubt it. Around the puppy's neck, under the ribbon, was a small envelope. Elaine opened it and read the note inside out loud. She got 3 lines in and stopped. Cole was already on one knee. He had a ring in his hand, a plain gold band, narrow, nothing added to it. "Will you marry me?" he said. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Her hand was shaking when she held it out. Rosa was crying. Helen Briggs's champagne glass hit the cabin floor with a sound that turned every head in the room. Helen had thrown it down with clear intention and had accomplished what she set out to do. And she was standing very straight, announcing to the room that she was the boy's grandmother now, that nobody had asked her, but she had looked into her own heart and made a decision, and that she considered the matter closed. The room went quiet for a beat, and then everyone started laughing, including Cole, who put his face briefly into his hand. Frank DeLuca, who had been standing near the back of the room, moved toward Rosa at the end of the night. "I noticed you didn't drive," he said. "I can give you a ride home if you need one. It's not out of my way." Rosa looked at him, actually looked the way she had not been doing earlier in the evening. "All right," she said. "That would be fine." They filed for the marriage license on Monday morning. The wedding was 3 weeks later, small, the people who mattered. Helen wore a hat. The honeymoon was a week at an all-inclusive resort in the Caribbean, booked and paid for by their friends over Cole's protests, which nobody took seriously. He had never been outside Indiana or Ohio. On the first morning, he woke before Elaine went down to the water, while it was still early, and stood at the edge where the sand went flat and the ocean started. He stood there for a long time without moving, and whatever was happening in him during those few minutes he kept to himself. They came home a week later, easy with each other in the way that people get when they have had uninterrupted time to just be somewhere together. Helen was in the lobby when they came through the door. She handed Cole the accumulated mail and told them she had cottage cheese pancakes on the stove downstairs. She headed back down while they took the bags up. Cole set the mail on the kitchen counter, and they unpacked first. When they sat down with Helen's food, he went through the stack. Most of it was ordinary. Near the bottom was a registered letter with a Millhaven return address. Cole opened it, read it at the table, and when Elaine looked up, his face had changed in the way she recognized from the night he heard about Nora. He folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket. "It's nothing urgent," he said. She looked at him. He did not look back up from the table. That night, she woke at 2:30 to find his side of the bed empty. He was at the kitchen table in the dark, not reading, not on his phone, just sitting. She stood in the doorway. "Cole." He looked up. "I'm fine," he said. "Go back to sleep." She went back to bed. In the morning, he was already dressed when she came downstairs. His backpack was on the chair by the door. On top of his folded jacket inside the bag sat a small wooden horse, palm-sized, painted brown and white, with a real hair mane gone wispy with age. She had seen it on his dresser since the day he came back from Millhaven after Nora's funeral. She had never asked about it. "Where are you going?" she said. "I have something to handle. I'll call you tonight and explain everything, I promise." He picked up the bag. "It's not what you're thinking. You don't know what I'm thinking. Elaine." He looked at her directly. "I'll call you tonight." He kissed her and left. She sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the empty spot on his dresser, where the horse had been. She thought about the letter he had not shown her, and the 2 in the morning kitchen, and the way he had said it is not what you are thinking, which meant he had some idea of what she was thinking. She sat there for about 4 minutes. Then she got her keys. She knew the road to Millhaven. She parked half a block from Ruth Calloway's house behind a section of overgrown privet hedge that screened the car from the driveway and walked up the block on foot. Cole's truck was in front of the house. The front door was propped open. In the backyard, a small boy was sitting on the frame of an old metal swing set, not swinging, just sitting, holding something in both hands and talking to it in the patient tone that children use when explaining something important to an audience that cannot answer back. He was holding the wooden horse. He told it in a voice she could just make out that the man who gave it to him was probably his dad. She stood very still for a moment. Then she went inside. The front room was full of people, a dozen or more, sitting with plates and talking quietly. There was food on every surface. On the dresser, against the far wall in a plain black frame, was a photograph of Ruth Calloway. Elaine knew the face. She was the woman who had come at Cole with open hands at Nora's funeral, grief running sideways because it had nowhere else to go. Cole found her standing near the wall. He took her hand and walked her outside around the side of the house, away from the yard. He told her the letter had been from Tilda Marsh, the neighbour who had looked after Ruth in her last weeks. Ruth had died 10 days earlier. The boy in the backyard was Danny Larissa's son, 4 years old, father unknown. Ruth had been raising him alone since Larissa died and had never told Cole he existed. Pride, Tilda wrote, and grief, and maybe the belief that asking Cole for anything was something she was not willing to do. The people in Millhaven were too old for Indiana's Child Welfare Office to consider for placement. A case had been opened. The wooden horse was a birthday gift Larissa had given Cole when they were 8 years old. He had brought it to give to Danny because it was the only thing he owned that had ever been in both their hands. Elaine took the letter from him and read it. Then she stood there, with it open, and felt the heat of having followed her husband to a dead woman's wake because she was afraid of what she would find. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought." She stopped. Cole put his hand on the back of her head and held it there for a moment. Small footsteps came around the corner of the house and Danny appeared, still carrying the horse, and stopped when he saw Elaine. He looked at her with the direct, unguarded attention of a child who has learned quickly to read adults. Then he walked over and held the horse out toward her. "Do you want to learn how to make a really good dirt pile?" he said. "I know the best spot." She took his hand. He led her to the far corner of the yard where a patch of bare ground ran along the edge of the garden bed, and he crouched down and showed her the correct technique, with the horse standing nearby as a witness. She crouched next to him and did what he showed her. A minute passed. Then another. Danny stopped and looked up at her with a long, assessing look. "Are you my mom?" he said. "Did you finally find me?" Elaine was already close to the ground. She went the rest of the way and knelt in the dirt in front of him. "I found you," she said. "I'm sorry it took me so long." He put both arms around her neck and held on with the full weight of himself, the way children hold on when they have decided something is true and are not letting go of it. She wrapped her arms around him and stayed there. Inside the house, someone had drifted to the window. Then, someone else. By the time Cole turned to look, 3 of the older women had their hands over their mouths and 2 of them were already crying. Cole looked at them through the glass. "Knock it off," he said. "We've got something to celebrate." The crying continued. He shook his head and went to join his wife and the boy in the yard.